A report shows obesity rates are on the rise.
Obesity in America.
People in more states are larger than ever.
A video starting with the declaration that America is overweight is definitely not novel. Morgan Spurlock, who just died tragically, released Super Size Me in 2004. And what he illustrated was truly the extent to which fast food is unhealthy. Since the movie came out in 2004, the number of fast food restaurants has increased by thousands. McDonald's itself is worth 10 times as much. Lack of nutrition literacy and education are not why people are overweight. Yes, there is confusion about what food you should eat to lose weight, questions about whether a certain macronutrient is good or bad, but people generally know if they're eating worse than they could be, even if they don't know exactly how many extra calories they're getting or truly the extent to which what they're eating is bereft of nutrients. Since the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act became law in 1990, the Nutrition Fact Panel has become one of the most recognizable graphics in the country. So for a long time, food companies didn't have to list how much sugar their food contained as a percentage of your daily allowance. They changed this recently. Now you know that a single Coke has 110% of the sugar you should consume in a day. Has this had any great effect on consumption of sugar? Theoretically, people can have near complete knowledge of what they're eating now. In Europe, for example, they have something called the Nutri-Score system. Foods are literally given a letter grade, A being the best, E being the worst. But would adopting such a program here have any great effect? Do people need to see that a Pop-Tart has an E rating to know that it probably isn't as good as a banana? So clear labeling, I'm going to say probably isn't going to be a deciding factor. I would also add that people buy packs of cigarettes with warnings on them every day. I mean, if boxes of cereal had to list the current cost of insulin on the package, that would be something. It's also not even because healthy food is too expensive. Yes, eating healthy food while you're out is more expensive, $15 salad from Sweetgreen, or a slice of pizza for $1.50. But healthy grocery items themselves can be very inexpensive. Contrary to any number of articles highlighting the cost of healthy food, I never found that compelling. The average American spends roughly $270 a week on groceries. Well, here's a healthy diet I threw together. It's plant-based with minimally processed food that provides 2,000 calories a day for a family of 4, which is actually more than would be required if the family in question has little kids, and it's about $180 a week, assuming the access is there, of course. But if people generally know what's healthy and what's not, and labeling is only marginally important, and if the cost isn't the real issue, what is? Prior to the turn of the 20th century, diets were much more localized, based more on local agriculture. Canning, fermenting, pickling, methods of preserving food for the off-season were essential. Meat consumption was way less. Molasses was a primary sweetener because it was cheaper since it's a byproduct of manufacturing sugar. Most Americans grew some of their own food and often raised livestock. But toward the end of the 19th century, there were a couple big changes. For one thing, there were advances in packaging. The tin can was not new, but canning became so cheap and easy that by 1900 there were more than 1,000 canneries. The other thing around the same time was the cardboard box was invented. Things like flour and sugar up to this point would have just been scooped out of huge barrels at the store. Now things like that and anything else could be packaged for individual consumption. Plus, things that are stored in a box as opposed to an open barrel are more likely to be uncontaminated. Around this time, 20% of manufacturing in the US was food processing. So you have this revolution in packaging. By the 1920s, you also have chain grocery stores in full swing. Kroger's, Piggly Wiggly, A&P had 16,000 locations by this time. At their height, A&P got 10% of all the money Americans spent on food. Food shopping, once a heavy burden, became a minor concern. So you now have immense manufacturing capabilities, packaging, and chains with massive purchasing power, thus incentivizing companies to create foods that can be made in enormous quantities and sent all over the country to different locations. Now in the 1930s, there were big advances in food science. There were also a lot of nutrient deficiencies. Deficiencies of B vitamins were highly prevalent in the United States in the early 1900s, and about 7,000 deaths due to pellagra were reported in 1928. B vitamins were synthesized in 1936, and enrichment of flour, also with iron, was immediately on the table. As it turned out, 25% of people's calories were coming from refined flour now. And because of the newer industrial milling process of flour, essentially to make a product that had a longer shelf life, the wheat was milled in such a way as to end up removing these nutrients. the new refined flour had 1/11 of the thymine content of the old stone ground flour. And so they were added back in artificially. Here you can see in the green all the nutrients that whole wheat has, then in the red what's left after refinement, and then in yellow which nutrients are added back. Big advancements in species of corn. This included corn that was disease resistant, more durable. We went from producing 24 bushels of corn per acre in 1931 to 177 today. An area equal to half the size of California is now dedicated to growing corn, most of which is used for animal feed and ethanol. Only about 2% is for actual direct consumption. And so you probably know where this is going. By the 1960s, high fructose corn syrup was developed and available for commercial use. When we think of sugar, we think of cane sugar. But cane sugar availability has actually gone down over the last 60 years, whereas availability of high fructose corn syrup went from half a pound per American in 1970 to 19 pounds a person in 1980 to 50 pounds a person in 1990. And now it's actually around 40 pounds per capita because so many people are wise to the health concerns. Every advance in science and manufacturing promised profit, proliferation, and availability. In the 1950s, there were advances in chicken breeding, and so they bred more so-called broiler chickens. It was cheaper and easier, poultry consumption just went up. But other things didn't really go down commensurately. It was just more available. People simply added more chicken to their diet. And actually, chicken consumption has been going up ever since. All of this availability was reinforced with marketing. Food companies spending up to $14 billion a year familiarizing us with brands and manufacturing desire. And the companies that produce all of this processed and ultra-processed food have grown to absurd sizes. The three biggest, based on 2022 and 2023 sales figures, are PepsiCo, Tyson, and Nestle. Pepsi alone had a revenue of around $90 billion. And you can look through the brand lists of these companies and decide for yourself if most of what they produce should really ever be consumed. And this probably goes without saying, but these companies have also grown in political influence. In the 1992 election cycle, the food industry spent $29 million. And in 2020, it spent $175 million. The sum total of all of that growth and science and technology and marketing is this. Food manufacturing makes up 15% of all the manufacturing jobs, which is the biggest percentage of any sector. And while vegetable availability is on a 2-decade decline, processed food accounts for 73% of the food supply in this country. The most addictive and unhealthy food ever made makes up a majority of what's available. It's what's in front of people. It's easy and it tastes good, and it's not always the cheapest thing, but it's cheap enough. People just can't compete with the sheer availability. So what can be done? Well, the WHO has proposed a few different ideas: taxing unhealthy foods, provide subsidies to increase the consumption of fruit and vegetables, regulate where and how outlets can operate. But ultimately, in my opinion, there just has to be way less ultra-processed food available. There have been some legislative attempts to get this under wraps too. Nutrition labeling, obviously, trans fats have pretty much been eliminated, but legislative proposals have to be just way more drastic if we don't want 70% of supermarket shelves stocked with food that our bodies don't seem to be that tolerant of. But that will do it for me. My name is Spencer Snyder. If you found this video interesting, make sure you are subscribed to Breaking Points. You can also find me on Twitter or at my own channel. Liking and sharing always helps. Thank you to Breaking Points. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.